Warden of mile marker 6050, and wrote this, the first draft, on Friday of last week, and now we're going to do some work on it. My goals for this one is, of course, to smooth out the narrative, maybe punch up the writing a little bit, but I also want to add sensory detail. Not a ton. I don't want to overwhelm it with too much description beyond what adds to the story, but I want to add in the senses of smell, taste, and feel to this story, and hopefully that will add something to what we have here. So let's go ahead and jump on in and get started. Warden of Mile Marker 6050 by J. Wilburn. Memphis Wilder hid in the shadows under a fiberglass boat in the deep desert. The war machine crunched against another piece of wreckage to add to the pile across the kingdom's great highway. He tried to be patient, but this was a great affront to everything he held dear as a warden of the Order of Finn. He took a few breaths and held the last as he added his poor man's mix of mercury fulminate to the percussion caps of his last bullets. Let me add a smell in here since he's taking deep breaths. He held the last. Hey, Zach, thanks for jumping in, man. All right, so trying to add extra sensory details in here beyond just sight and sound. Okay, he took a few breaths. The air was hot and stale. He couldn't tell if the heavy smells of burnt sand came from his powdered mix. He couldn't tell if the heavy smells of burnt sand came from his powdered mix or something ancient seeped into the desert floor. All right, seeped isn't the right word. I'm thinking ancient, saturated into the desert floor. All right, that'll be good enough for now. He held the last take of air as he added his poor man's mix of mercury fulminate to the percussion caps of his last few bullet casts. We'll leave it at that. When he was a child, Memphis's father told him every machine that had fallen in the wars of sky and land had been stripped away by the desert scavengers. The reality was that there was too much metal out here to scavenge in 100 generations. His mother couldn't read, but she'd memorized the stories she told him at night. He found, let's say she had told him at night. Because we're doing past participle, I believe it's called. He found himself remembering the one called The Boy Who Cried Off. It was a story from the legend of Finn Yates and his friends. It was a story of courage and adventure. Memphis checked his hip guns. Let's put a touch here. And used his new bullets to fill the speed loaders. The grips were smoother than what was probably for the best. The loaders had sharp, hard edges he could feel through his calluses. Alright, that's a good feel descriptor there. He could say he shifted, not he could feel. Because of our used feel, you don't want to do that too much. He shifted the range rifle strapped to his sweaty back, but he shifted, let's say, and checked that one too. He shifted the range rifle strapped to his sweaty back and checked that one too. There we go. Then he felt for the battle cleaver on his belt. If he got down to using that swing blade against an armored war machine, he was probably dead anyway. He took a few more breaths. His hands grew numb and he trembled. Could have been fear, the heat, or mercury poisoning, but none of that mattered. He whispered to himself, but heard his mother's voice in his head. When Finn Yates first fell through the doorway to all worlds, he was alone, afraid, and lost. Not the hero he one day would be. So he did what he needed in order to survive. All right, looking good. If Memphis stopped there, the lesson would be to stay hidden and survive. But he slipped out of cover and moved from one pile of scrap to another across the sand toward the atrocity blocking the highway. The change in temperature from stuffy shadows to direct desert sun was stark. He felt his scalp cooking. Let's be more direct. His scalp cooked. Alright, more sensory detail, that's good. He whispered again. When Finn was a privateer and no one's hero, he saw the fires burning in the velvet skies and the blood spilled in the lavender oceans, and he could take no more. He returned through the doorway to ask his 4 young friends to come with him. Only Milo came. The others cried off, so the 2 of them took up the fight. Memphis stopped at the last pile of metal between him and the war machine, screeching as it pressed debris across the highway. He took care not to touch his back to the pile. The edges were razor sharp and heat wavered off of them, distorting his view of reality. Alright, I feel good about that. He looked east and thought about his friends. When the marauders, I need to save that word because I forgot how to spell it later on. I think I switched to bandits, but I think I'm going to use marauders more often. So we'll see where it goes. He looked east and thought about his friends. When the marauders started using this machine, let's say, however they got it started again, he traveled 10 miles east to mile marker 6040. There he found Blake in a shallow grave with his rotting toes pointed skyward. He traveled another skyward. Let's add something else. I'm going to make the next paragraph a new one. And animals had chewed away at what was exposed and stunk of fresh rot. A few divots. Let me see if I can spell that right. A few divots in the sandy grave showed they were exploring. I'll say showed that nocturnal creatures were exploring for more of Blake. Alright, I like that. Feel bad for Blake, but I like the description. He traveled another 12 miles to find... He wasn't finding anybody. Come on now. Why would he be writing tickets in the middle of a battle? Let's say he had traveled. Because again, we're past participle. He had traveled another 12 miles to find the 6030 Warden dead as well. Memphis couldn't remember that man's name, but they had speared him. Let's say, I keep getting this off screen, I'm sorry. The killers had speared him naked upon a twisted piece of sharp tin. Alright, that's okay. A twisted piece of sharp tin. Once they'd impaled him, they turned him a dozen times to spiral him down upon the metal. Memphis bet they had the Warden alive and screaming as they did so. Alright, made that a little ugly there. Alright, Memphis had quickly gone west, looking for more help. Exactly at the 60-60 mile marker, he found Hess crucified upon 4 pieces of rebar, one each for his outstretched wrists, one for his ankles, and a final one through the back of his skull. Memphis traveled another 18 miles without finding the next Warden. He'd returned to his post at 60-50, knowing he was alone. Alright. Memphis prepared to come out of cover and do his best to foil the machine. Then he heard sand crunch on both sides of his cover. Well, let's just say sand crunched. Then sand crunched. I don't want to filter the story through other people's senses. Then sand crunched on both sides of his cover. He rolled away less than a second before curved blades of folded sheet metal rang off the scraps where his head had been. Let's say the hot scraps. We already described the heat swirling off of him. He landed on his back with a loaded shooter in each hand. He fired both, missing with one and killing with the other. He rolled again to avoid the survivor's blade. Careful to aim with one gun, he took off that bandit's head. Alright, Memphis allowed himself a few breaths before he heard the engine roar. He came up in a full run as the war machine plowed through the scrap, scattering it in all directions off, let's say the machine's blood hooks. He dodged from side to side to make his slaying as inconvenient as possible. Wheels, let's say spiked wheels. Spiked wheels taller than him by half again, gripped the loose ground and spit sand into the air behind it. Memphis thought he could taste the heavy metals soaked into that dry sand. It could have been his own bile. All right. He managed to double back around a field of crushed trucks. The war machine blasted through one pile after another, trying to find him. The stink of exhaust stayed. No, what stayd's not the best word. The stink of exhaust hung low to the ground. It smelled It smelled worse than the poisoned sand. It smelled worse than the poisoned sand. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. I may have to add something to that or even cut that whole paragraph, but I'll do that later. All right. Memphis ventured a look and saw the warriors crossing. Let me go back to Marauders here. Control V. All right, Memphis ventured a look and saw the Marauders crossing the highway toward him. Once he was gone, there would be nothing between them and the people of Talonwood back in the Box Canyon. Let's see, which direction would that be? Box Canyon to the north. Alright. He rolled his long gun off his shoulder and aimed over the crinkled fender of a ruined diesel. Memphis whispered to himself when Finn and Milo found themselves in the service of Kingdom Bright with 10,000 miles of highway to protect. He went back for his friends again. He managed to fire off 3 true shots, taking out that many killers. The rest dove for cover. He wasted 2 more shots, sending sparks off metal barriers to discourage them from coming out for more. He itched under his clothes from heat and adrenaline. I'm gonna have to do a spell check on that one. No, I got it the first try. Holy smokes. He itched under his clothes from heat and adrenaline. His feet were the worst, and he thought he might be risking some creeping disease inside his boots. Okay. The engine roared in his ear, so Memphis retreated as the machine tore after him. Let's make it Marauders again. The Marauders advanced again. A claw clamp, because that's what I was trying to say. A claw clamp just missed his back as he charged away from the attack. Okay. Let me make this a new paragraph. He smelled the chemical rush across his face. It was cool and refreshing, but he knew it meant his death. Still, he ran. Flame erupted hot enough and close enough out of the kill vents that he felt that the heat singed against him, but he escaped with his hide again. He made a go at another section of junk a little further away, but a rivet spun past his face, right in front of his eyes. He fell back behind the wreckage, too close to where the war machine made its wide turn for another attack. A crude arrow and another rusty bolt bounced off the edge of the shielding plate next to his head. Did I use head more than once? No, I did not. Good job. All right. They had him. He drew his hip gun again and waited. It wasn't a long wait as fighters came around both sides and over the top above his head. He fired as quickly as the trigger would pull. They were all around him, so it was hard to miss. At least the war machine wouldn't crash through with their people here, but then the machine crashed through anyway. Bodies and shards of metal flew in every direction. Memphis ran for the next pile of junk through the open ground. The warriors fired their arrows and slings, but hit their own people as Memphis ran. The aroma of fresh spilled blood and the raw odor of opened bowels followed him from the fallen bodies. Alright, good enough. He rolled into the cover and recharged his weapons with the speed loaders. They were on him again. The hammers of both guns fell on duds. Memphis pulled his battle cleaver and buried it in the forehead of the closest attacker. He fought to pull the blade loose from the skull as the next bandit charged with the spear. Memphis dodged by inches and pulled the cleaver free and into an attack in one motion. He unzipped the bandit's throat from ear to ear. Blood and breath escaped from the same opening in a wet sigh. Let's say it misted his face like a hot, wet wind. I'll say breeze. Alright, getting kind of bloody here. She fell to her back, still holding her spear. He made his way from one pile of scrap to another wall of debris all the way across the desert. The war machine ripped through it all like it was paper. He was out of breath and waning fast, but his dry lips still moved, and the breathy verses of the story went on. 2 of his friends joined him the last visit to defend the highway and unite the kingdoms. 1 friend still cried off, so 4 saved the world, and 1 knew no adventures at all. Legends are written by those who dare. As metal gave way to rock, Memphis struggled to stay ahead of the pursuers. His boots scarred The orange tallow down to white powder. There was no hiding his trail from his pursuers. Okay. All right, speeding on to the end. Someone grabbed his shoulder and pulled him into the darkness. He lifted both his hip shooters even though he knew they were empty. Hold your fire, she said. Briggs? Briggs was one of the matriarchs of Talonwood. She held her sword at the ready as she whispered, "You're supposed to protect the highway, not bring them to us." "That wasn't my plan," he said in a voice thin and thready from exertion. "I find myself short on options and allies." Marilyn stepped up out of the deeper darkness. "It's not gone well for your fellow wardens." "Not as far as I've traveled in either direction." Drew and Legacy stepped up as well. All four women carried javes, sheer swords, daggers, and iron hanks. They were ready for battle, even if they didn't appreciate him bringing it to them. "Where are the marshals?" Drew asked. Legacy added, "They're," let's say, make this a contraction. "They're supposed to patrol for this very threat. For this very sort of threat." Alright. Memphis bent down and held his knees, still struggling for breath. The engine noise closed in enough to echo in this little cave. Some are fighting insurrectionists at the walls of Kingdom Bright, 6,000 miles east. Some battle pirates to the harbors on the far oceans, 4,000 miles west. The rest protect King Crest over the mountains from the airships of the barbarians. "That leaves you as our only protector," Briggs laughed. "I will not cry off," Memphis said as he stood straight, "but even Finn needed his friends." "Well, Finn and his friends are long dead," Briggs said. Alright, let me do a scene break here. I don't know if that's the best, but it may make the transition clearer. So we'll add a scene break, and then it's on to the final page. Alright, the war machine rested and idled like a growling beast outside the box canyon as Memphis emerged from a small side cave alone. He was out of range, but many of the fighters let fly their projectiles anyway. Many fighters flanking the machine. Flanking the terrible machine. Many fighters flanking the terrible machine let fly their projectiles anyway. They peppered the sand as he stood in the open between them and the canyon. Okay. The machine revved. Fire belched from the vents. A few of the warriors stood in the wrong place and screamed as they burned. No one advanced, but Memphis stood his ground. The cap fins opened on both armored sides of the machine. The claw clamps moved forward. The blood hooks caught the bright sunlight. Memphis holstered his guns and crossed his arms over his chest. The war machine roared forward in a cloud of disturbed sand and barreled down on him. The warriors, let's go back to Marauders. The Marauders ran as hard and fast as they could, but they fell behind. The machine doubled its power. Make that hits. Alright, the machine doubled its power, but then the wheels spun on loose sand as it sunk. The machine... Let me do War Machine again. The war machine tried to reverse itself, but tumbled down in the exposed trench anyway. The attackers pulled up short, and their cries dropped away to silence. From the cliffs in the canyon, gunfire erupted. There were more misses than hits, but as the bandits fell, The rest fled across the desert. Down in the pit, these sharp weapons worked from side to side. Flames licked out of the kill vents but did no good. The spiked wheels dug themselves deeper and deeper, making the air gritty above the pit. Gritty, let's say gritty and alkaline. And alkaline above the pit. As the warriors of Talonwood stood over the helpless machine, Briggs called down, "Come out if you want to live." The machine kept working. Say the wheels. The wheels kept working. Let me check spelling on alkaline. There we go. I need an extra L in there. Alright, in the home stretch here. The wheels kept working, but the hatches stayed closed. "Bury them," Briggs said. The machine was half buried in sand. Sand pushed off the sides. Before the hatches opened, the operators and drivers climbed out, squinting into the sun. Let's do comma, squinting in the sun, and then make this a new sentence. They were dragged away. "Are you going after them?" Briggs asked. Memphis shrugged. "They're less of a threat with their machine disabled. They can't possibly have another that works, or we would have seen it." Comma there. Alright, home stretch. "What about the murdered wardens to the east and west?" Marilyn asked. Memphis said, "They will pay, but I'm not charging forward into a pit trap like they did, and I need to cast a few more bullets first." "We can spare a few," Drew said. "Only a few," Briggs added. "Anything would help," he said. "We can offer some food and water too," Legacy said. Briggs stared at her, but said nothing else. Stared at her, but didn't contradict the offer. Legacy still answered, "We won a battle together. It is custom to celebrate." Memphis said, "I need to clear debris from the highway. We can help you with that after food, drink, and rest," Briggs said. Memphis looked toward the highway and thought of his mother's stories of courage. Briggs patted his shoulder and brought him back to the present. You're not the type to cry off, remember?" Memphis smiled and walked with the people of Talonwood toward the cool shadows of the canyon.